Today we're going to show you a little bit about symmetry, but really importantly, we want to try to start to introduce you to the concept of how to code. And basically what we're going to be doing is using symmetry as our sandbox to kind of start to understand a little bit about some of the fundamentals. And with that, we're going to slowly parlay into learning about VR and how we connect all these things together. And so here in front of us, what we're watching right now on this stream here is just an example of something that we'll eventually build up to in the next couple of days. Today, in fact, after today's knowledge that we're going to learn about today, you can pretty much do everything you see here. But you know, this is what it's all about. It's all about finding these funny, goofy little things that we can create and learning how to do that. So let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just file new this, and we're going to go to a nice, clean, empty environment. And before we get into any code, I'm going to introduce to you a little bit about what symmetry is all about and what we're looking at right now. So if you haven't already done so, make sure you launch symmetry, and once you get to this state, we'll get started. So basically, what is symmetry? Symmetry is a sandbox-first application that's really designed to let you explore and experiment in 3D space, and one of those outputs is also VR, and so it also allows us to explore and experiment lots of different ideas for VR as well. And we can use it to build all sorts of things. Games are the most obvious, but it's also all about creating those non-game ideas like interactive art and quirky ideas and music visualizations and anything else you can kind of really imagine. This is a tool really designed for that. So very quickly, just to kind of go over the tool, before we can really understand how code works with symmetry and we can get into the specifics of coding, we really have to understand what is the connection between 3D and symmetry, and how is it calling the code? Like, when is code getting called in symmetry? So before we do that, let's just go over the fundamentals of the app itself so we can kind of work our way there. So this first panel at the top left of the screen that you can kind of undock with your mouse when you hit the edge of the screen is the browser. And it basically shows everything in our world, including the universe here at the top, which is like the thing that contains all of our spaces. And in this case, we have one space called the terrain space. And that's what we're actually looking at right here. This is the main world that we're kind of looking out here. This is the terrain space, and so it's inside our universe. And we can create additional spaces here as well. But for today, we're just going to play in this default terrain space. So that's what our browser is. Our browser lets us find all the resources that are inside our spaces, and allows us to also import new things into that resource pool. On the left side here that you can undock is this toolbox, and this toolbox basically contains all of the tools and things that we can create inside the space, and also tools that let us kind of change certain properties of objects and automate a bunch of things. So it's like, you think of this as basically your tool belt, and it's where you go to like create things and basically manipulate the space and activate and access the tools that allow us to kind of manipulate the space that we're looking at. At the bottom, you can undock a timeline, and what this is basically a representation of time that we can see when we hit play. For instance, we can see that time starts. And through this timeline browser, we can do things like keyframing and view audio waveforms, so we can kind of synchronize things to the audio, and all things basically related to time. Next, this viewport window. We'll get into this a little bit later in the lessons, but the way to think of the viewport is it's what allows us to control what we're currently looking at. So imagine we create additional spaces in our universe. We can kind of control which space we're looking at through the viewport, and we can also control that programmatically so that we can, you know, change camera angles and really control where the viewer is at any one moment. And second to last is this hierarchy panel here on the right, and this just shows us everything in our space as well as the hierarchy of objects. So you can, you know, parent objects to other objects, and you can kind of view that hierarchy here. And lastly, the property editor at the top right here. This is what we're going to use to basically control and set objects' properties in the space. And it also allows us to grab individual elements from objects and then access them through script. So we'll get into all this a little bit later today. But the important thing is the property editor is fundamental in how we kind of control objects and change their appearance and all those kind of things. We're going to be doing that through the property editor. Okay, so the other really big thing is if you're just getting started with symmetry, today in this lesson we're really going to focus mostly on the code, and so there are a lot of little things in symmetry that you need to know how to do, like move objects around and move the camera around, things like that. And we're kind of going by the assumption that you've done the interactive tutorials. And so definitely, if you haven't done them already, make sure you look under the Learn menu here, and then there's Intro to Basics here. Make sure you go through each one of these. These are interactive tutorials that kind of guide you to all the different things that you'll need to know how to do for these tutorials. But the main thing you really need to know is how to move objects and how to move the camera around. And I'll quickly introduce that in this lesson today, but it definitely is something you want to kind of focus on your own when you have a moment, because it takes a little bit of time to kind of master. And so you'll want to just, as you're playing, kind of review that and just get more comfortable with it on your own time. And then it should be second nature after, in no time. You'll be flying through the space really easily. So definitely make sure you do these intro tutorials before we dig deeper into this tutorial. So of course, this obviously is presuming that a lot of you guys will be kind of viewing this after the fact. So that's totally cool. And we're here to respond to people in real time, but certainly we're also going to be responding to people over time. So next lesson, for instance, if people tell us, oh, it was too fast, or we want more information about a specific thing, we'll then address it then. Okay, so let's kind of figure out how code is going to get called in this environment, and let's start to dig into doing a little bit of coding. So the first thing we're going to do is, so the thing about when code gets called is really the fundamental thing here. There's a lot of different ways that code can get called in Simmetry. It can get called in response to an object passing through a particular location in space. It can get called in response to you clicking or an object in space, or maybe in VR you have your lasers and you interact on an object. That will call some code. You can also call code maybe in time, at a specific point in time. To start today, we're actually just going to focus on a very simple case, which is we want some code to call when an object passes through basically a shape in space. And we're starting here because it's a really straightforward and easy way to kind of understand how things work, and then we're going to slowly graduate into different ways. So that we can then do, for instance, in virtual reality, we can create an object that we can then interact with using our controllers. But for today, we're just going to start with just a basic, what happens when an object passes through a shape. And to get this going, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an actor first. And so we're going to click on actors from the top list of the toolbox here on the left side. And then on the bottom list, I'm going to select movable ball. And then in this space, I'm just going to click and drag to create a small little ball sphere. And then when you're done drawing, you're going to right click to kind of exit draw mode, and that kind of defaults you back to the default transform tool that lets us move it around. So now basically what we have is we have an actor, this movable ball actor, that when we hit play, we can use the WASD keys to kind of move this sphere around. And so this is going to give us a nice little simple way of moving an object basically through a shape that we're then going to have some code get called by. So so again, we went to actors at the top list, and then movable ball at the bottom list, clicked and dragged to create a sphere, and then right click to exit drawing, and then I hit play, and then we can kind of see it moving around when you use the WASD keys. Okay, so make sure you hit stop. We want to do most of our editing in stop time for now. It's just easier. The thing to be aware of is when we hit play and we move an object around, when you hit stop, it's going to reset its position back to that initial position. And so sometimes if we do editing at playtime, we can get a little, as soon as we hit stop, things tend to reset, and there's ways to commit those changes. We'll get into that a little later. But just so you guys don't get too lost, make sure just hit stop first before we proceed. So that you don't hit stop and then unexpectedly see things shift without being aware of that. Okay, so we have a nice sphere here that we can move around with the WASD keys. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to click from the top list, the triggers category, and from the bottom list we already have plane selected. So I'm going to draw a plane in this space, and the way I'm going to draw it is I'm just going to draw kind of a line on the ground. Kind of a straight line. We can draw it flat on the ground like this if you click and drag, but we kind of want the sphere to go through it. And so there's a little trick here. If you draw it as a line, when you let go, you can then kind of pull it up from the ground, but you got to start it as a thin line. So when I do that, I left click, drag, and then pull it up. And then I have a nice trigger, basically. And so what is a trigger? A trigger just represents a shape, in this case a plane, that when their sphere or an object passes through it, will call some code. So if I hit play here and then move the sphere through it, you'll see it flashes whenever it goes through it. And it has two directions. It has an enter direction and an exit direction. And for today, we're going to edit just the entering direction. So literally when the sphere goes straight into it in the direction of the arrows. So now that I've created this trigger, I'm going to double click on it. And when we do, this little code window pops up. And so what this is basically a function, which is essentially just a collection of code. A function is just a block of code, basically. And this function will get called every single time our sphere passes through this plane. And it will actually get called if any object passes through the plane. And so it's in here that we're going to now have something interesting happen. And so the simplest kind of case that everybody starts with is just to print hello world. So I'm just going to literally type in print hello world. So basically, when the sphere passes through this trigger will fire, and this function here will get called. So everything inside this function will execute, basically, will run, which in this case is just simply print hello world. So when I hit play and I move the sphere through it, you can see here at the bottom left-hand corner, hello world is printed. So you can think of print as basically printing it to the console, as like to the user, a special kind of layer that only the user can kind of see in this very specific thing. We'll get into setting text in the space too later, so that you can actually set some text inside the world and make that change. But for now, the simplest example here is just to kind of have it print it to this kind of console here, so we can kind of see stuff happening. And this is actually really useful to also kind of test things. And so this is a very, very simple case here. So you have just print and hello world, and another, for instance, thing to be aware of here in this function is you'll notice that our function here, which lives inside our trigger, also happens to have this parameter here. And this parameter actually is a variable that contains the object that passes through this trigger. So in this case, it's the sphere itself. So every single time the sphere passes through this trigger, this function gets called, and this object here is initialized to this sphere itself. And so, for instance, we can actually modify this print statement here to print the object's name by saying object get name. So this is a function on the object that now will print, and in this case, the object's name is movable ball. So we're starting a little high level here. We'll get into more specifics about what exactly is this variable, and a little later. And certainly, if people watching this stream find that this is going too slow or too fast, please let us know. I know that to people that are a little bit more familiar with code, this will seem pretty straightforward. And if you're not, maybe this will seem really, really Greek and just unusual. And so we definitely want feedback on that, because we definitely want to make sure everybody is kind of really introduced to this at the pace that they feel comfortable with. And so I'm mostly going to gloss over this just so we can kind of get to some fun stuff really quickly, and then we can kind of zoom in on more specifics of what exactly this variable and what does that mean, and what is this function here, and why does that live on this object, and why does that work that way. We'll definitely get into that more as the lessons progress. But now let's try doing something a little bit different here. Instead of printing something, let's affect the space in some way, because this is pretty useless right now in terms of we don't really do very much that's exciting in the space. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete that line of code, and the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw another object in our space, and this object is going to represent something that we're going to manipulate inside our script. And in this case, what I'm going to draw is an emitter. So I'm going to click on emitters here at the top of our toolbox, and at the bottom it's already selected, but I'm going to click on node emitter if it's not already selected. And then in this space, I'm just going to click and drag this node emitter, and then right click to exit drawing. And what is a node emitter? Well, if we hit play, you'll see that it just kind of emits these spheres. So basically what we're going to want to do is we want these spheres to emit not on their own like they're doing now, but only when this object passes through this trigger plane. And so what we need to do is we need to turn off the automatic emitters on the node emitter, the automatic emitting on this node emitter. We don't want it to keep doing this automatically. We want it to only do it when this sphere goes through it. So to do that, we're going to just select the node emitter, and then we're going to view its properties. We're going to undock the property editor here. We're going to browse down to this continuous group here, and you'll notice that it has a pulse right now called a constant pulse. And what a pulse is just something that emits an event at some time at some interval of time, and at every interval in this case it's emitting a sphere, and we just want to clear this. We're just going to hit none. So that basically says do not emit in time. Now this thing is basically completely manual. We're going to have to emit on our own, in this case inside the script. So I'm going to hit stop here. So now what we need to do is basically access this node emitter through the script. And so how do we do that? We're going to again view the node emitter's properties, and then you'll see this icon here for node emitter. We're just going to click and drag that right into the trigger script. So you'll notice that when I drag it, it automatically places this line of code here, which basically is code that it goes and finds this object using this kind of unique ID. You can think of it as a social security number of the object. And this, once it finds it, it stores it in this variable, which is on the left side of this equal sign. So now we basically have in our script an object, a variable that represents this node emitter. And so now I'm going to just write one little line of code here that will emit a node. So emit node. So when I do this, basically, whenever this trigger fires, this object will emit a node. And so again, using the WASD keys, I'm going to roll the sphere straight through it, and there it goes. It emits that object, but only when we enter it through the arrow direction, since it's on enter. And so we can see now that every single time we do it, emits an object. Now the interesting thing is because this node emitter is itself emitting objects that can call the trigger, if we actually rotate this, I'm going to hold down control and then it turns yellow here. I'm going to just rotate this to face the trigger. Now you get this interesting case that when it goes through here, it emits an object, which then causes another object to emit, and then they keep emitting indefinitely. So we can already kind of get a sense here that you can start to play around with this kind of recursive nature. In this case, recursion meaning something calls something that then calls that thing again. And you get these fun kind of patterns that start to emerge. So another thing I definitely want to introduce is the idea of an error being thrown. So in this case, everything's been working fine. But what happens if, for instance, we delete this node emitter? Now we still have this code here that points to finding this object that now doesn't exist. And so let's see what happens when we hit play and roll our sphere through. It throws an error. And basically what this is saying is, it's a little cryptic, but the idea is it's saying that this node emitter object, this variable node emitter, is nil, is nothing. It doesn't have any, it's not initialized to anything. And so that means we can't call a function on a non-initialized object. So again, these find functions, and when we drag and drop something into script, just be aware that that is an absolute object, and if we delete that object, then we also have to be mindful of making sure that any code that might access that object, like in this case, that it be updated, or we just re-update it. So what I'm just going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just create another node emitter, and I'm going to go and set its constant pulse to none, and then I'm just going to drag and drop that new one into here, and it actually has a different ID now. This is a new type of object, and now we've fixed that script. So this is kind of the main idea behind one very simple case of basically calling script whenever an object passes through a particular shape. Now in VR, this is one implementation of this in VR, for instance, is when your hand passes through a particular place in space. This would be a perfect case of that, where you'd want something like this kind of behavior to occur. And we're going to get into some other ways that can work, the other ways that we can have things in VR trigger that. But as a starting point, this is a very, very simple way of kind of understanding how script is going to get called. Now another thing we could do here, for instance, is make a copy of this trigger. So if I hold down Alt and drag this trigger, it's going to make a copy of it. So now it's going to happen twice. Two things are going to go through, and we go into each. And if I just keep making copies of that, when I hit play, every single time it goes through, it's going to call that script. Now if I take this node emitter and again face it toward here, now when it goes through, it's going to create 3, and it's going to keep emitting a massive burst in this case. Now we have, the node emitter has a property that limits the total number that it will emit to kind of make sure we don't get overkill. So it's set to 20 in this case. That's why it seems to end, but we can crank that up, and then you can kind of see more going through. But they very quickly kind of explode in terms of the number of items that are going through it. So I'm going to delete some of these. Hit stop, and then have this go through. So that's the main idea. And again, what we're going to do as the lessons progress is we're going to go into more specifics about how the scripts work, and we're going to introduce other ways of when script gets called. And another thing to actually be aware of with these triggers is that these are not visible in present time. So there's this other button here at the bottom right hand corner, which is the present button, which is basically saying, show me what it looks like in the real, when I actually deploy it as a game to other people or as an experience that I want people to see without all these kind of helper objects, like these things are just designed to let you visualize it in the editor, like this pink box here, but these are not visible in the final product. So for instance, if we wanted to be able to visualize this, we would have to just draw objects that represent where this might be. So in this case, if I draw a couple of boxes here, now we can see in present time that that's where that trigger would lie. And then through script, we can also kind of automate the way it flashes, and it can manipulate things in space to kind of give it a nice visual kind of representation of what's going on. So that's kind of the main idea for triggers. Some of the, again, more important things are case matters. So when you're typing in scripting functions, case matters. So this is based on the Lua language. So basically, if we look at how Lua works, we're going to follow exactly how Lua works. Basically, it is just a Lua language, and so scripting matter, case matters, and then there's other conventions like camel casing, and we'll get into more of this a little bit later. So I think the other thing that we can kind of get into today is maybe a slightly different way of causing script to get called. And this will kind of be a little preview of what we're going to look into more tomorrow, because then that's going to nicely lead us into VR and understanding how we can now create a hand that will manipulate something in space, and what the bounding blocks, what the building blocks of that are going to look like. So I'm going to very quickly show this to you, but I think we want to keep these lessons relatively simple. We don't want to introduce too much at once, because it'll kind of let us kind of introduce little bit by little bit, day by day. But let me quickly show you guys another way of creating a script point for an object. So I'm going to create a box here, and on this box I'm now going to select it, and on the property editor I'm going to click this tiny little button here. It's called the attribute button, and when I click that, I'm going to add this attribute called interactable. And what this will do is it adds this new item here on the object called interactable that when we click it, introduces these other types of events, like on press, on pressing, on release, that basically occur whenever we interact with the mouse on the object, or in VR if we click with the laser on the object itself. So in this case, I'm going to click on the on press event, and again it brings up our little code window. And in this case, what we're going to do is anytime you interact with this object, again, we're going to do something similar. We're going to have this emitter, this node emitter, emit a node. And so again, I'm going to click on this node emitter. I'm going to drag that icon into here. And just like we did before, we're going to say emit node on this. So now basically anytime in playtime I click on it, on this cube, a node is emitted. And also in VR, basically, if we take our VR rig, and we're going to get into more of this in a future lesson, but basically whenever we interact our laser on this, it will cause this to kind of fire script. Call this script, and this is where we can do all sorts of fun things. We can make it so we can grab it, throw it, make it so maybe it activates a door in the space, it's a button, make it change an environment. So let's take a look at, for instance, something else we can really quickly do. We can change the time of day here. So right now we're kind of in this middle of the day, and if we want to change the time of day in script, for instance, I'm going to click on the sky, and when I do that, the sky space is selected here in the property editor. And if it doesn't, just try clicking again. If you kind of create a little box, it doesn't select the spot, so you have to make sure you just click the mouse without creating a little box by mistake. Just left click in the sky. Again, we're going to take the sky space here and just drag and drop it into here, and then we'll see that sky space has this property called time of day, and we can literally set that property. And we're going to get into, again, more specifics of how this works in later lessons, but we'll be able to say time of day is equal to, and it's in 24 hours, so we can just set it to like 8, which is 8 a.m. And so now when I click this, it goes to 8 a.m. in the morning. And so this is an example of something very simple, for instance, that we're going to be doing a lot of, which is find an object in the space that we want to like manipulate, and when we find its icon, we're going to just drag and drop that into our code window, and then we're going to set one of its properties on the right-hand side in the script, just like we did here. And it's amazing how you can do a lot with just that one thing, because most of what you ultimately want to achieve is just changing the state of the world, and that gets us really far. And then in future lessons, we're also going to show you how to create more complex things. Things like, if I go to the toys here, there's this breakable box here. For instance, this thing's pretty cool. When you can smash it when you hit it on the ground, and that actually just is working through script. And how that works is actually really straightforward to break down. And so we're going to break down things like that. Another example is going to be this physics-based thing here. So we're going to also have lessons on physics. But this attractor, for instance, this thing attracts whatever comes to it. And again, this is just script that we'll be able to break down for you and understand how that works. And here it is, actually. Here's the script that's making that attractor work that way. And as we draw boxes here, they all get attracted to it. Little objects. But how does this work? And is actually really straightforward, but we'll break this down for you so you can kind of see how that is, and so you can then start to introduce your own things. For instance, if we just invert the sign of this, it becomes it repels objects instead. And so it's very gratifying to just make simple little changes and just kind of see things just work. And I've just switched the sign again, and it will kind of come back to it. And this box here is fully interactable, so I just clicked on it and changed the time of day here. So these are all the kind of things we're going to kind of get into. But I think that probably will wrap up this lesson. What we definitely encourage you guys to do is please get back to us in the forums and in the Discord, and let us know if there's certain things that you're more interested in. We can structure these as either really making a gentle kind of introduction to code, or maybe people are more familiar with that and we just want to jump right into the heart of getting into thinking about virtual reality and creating kind of interactions for virtual reality and really thinking about that. So we really would love some feedback and to see where everybody's head's at. But if really the main spirit here is really to introduce people to code, and so that is going to be one of the biggest kind of drivers of these lessons. Is we're going to try to really introduce you guys to all the different elements of programming to kind of really understand what's going on, and to then also use those skills in other contexts as well. So thank you for listening to this lesson, and we look forward to hearing your feedback, and we'll be back tomorrow at 1 o'clock with another lesson, and so we hope to see you there.